This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Mother's Day is almost here, and you can get her the most beautiful time-tested gift around. A watch she can wear every day from Movement. Whether mom's into classic dress watches, rare and refined ceramics, or tried and true bestsellers, Movement has something she'll love. And right now you can save big on the best Mother's Day gift ever with up to 50% off site-wide during Movement's Mother's Day sale at mvmt.com. Again, that's up to 50% off at mvmt.com.
We made this.
Welcome back, everybody, to the X-Cast. As ever, the truth is in here. I'm your host for this episode, Carl Sweeney, and welcome back to I Want to Believe Minute, the series we're now doing where we unpick the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. And today, we're looking at minute 11, which starts at the 10-minute mark, and it starts right at the end of the previous scene between Mulder and Scully, just after Mulder has said that he'll go back to Washington under one condition, and this minute goes through to 10 minutes 59 seconds as the helicopter lands in Washington DC. And joining me is regular X-Cast guest Clara Cook. Hello, Clara.
Hello, Carl. How are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. It's been a little while since I spoke to you on a podcast, so
yes, definitely.
How are things going, and what have you been up to?
Good. They've been very good. I am currently working and I'm studying, and I haven't done much podcasting recently just because studying's taken priority. So it's a delight to be doing it today, I must say. I was really looking forward to today. And yes, I've been rewatching the X-Files film, I Want to Believe. So yeah, it's been good.
And I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts about this film, of course. And before we start, a quick reminder to follow the podcast on social media. If you can, we're at the X_cast on X, formerly known as Twitter. And if you're enjoying the show, please do drop us a quick 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts if you possibly can. And don't forget as well that we've got a Patreon you can subscribe to, which is patreon.com/thexcast for, a few bonuses like early releases of episodes and that kind of thing. Okay, Clara, so can you tell me a bit about your journey with I Want to Believe? Do you remember seeing it? I'm going to assume you saw it back in 2008 when it came out. I mean, do you have clear memories of that and what you thought about the film at the time?
Yeah, so I saw it in the cinema, and I saw it with a friend of mine, and I think I mean, it was X-Files, and I'm an X-Files fan, major X-Files fan, lifelong fan. So I think I was excited to see another X-Files movie, and I think I enjoyed it because it was X-Files, but I think I didn't enjoy it as much as Fight the Future. Bear in mind, in 2008, I was a lot younger. I actually I'd never podcasted about X-Files before that point. And
did podcasts even exist at 2008? When did podcasts come into being?
They did, but they were like real. It was like the early days of podcasting.
Yeah.
And I mean, I didn't have a podcast app on the phone. I didn't have a smartphone in 2008, so I wouldn't have known how to even access podcasts, I guess, unless I was on a web browser on a computer or something, maybe. And I think it was a much smaller field, surely. I think there were probably less people doing it because less people had access to the technology, software. So yeah, so I guess I hadn't analysed the X-Files in the way that, I do now through X-Cast, but also just through my own viewing process, like I know the way I watch television now and watch films. I feel like I think deeper about them. So at the time, I enjoyed the film, but I think I was, it's not as good as Fight the Future.
Yeah.
That's what I felt at the time. And I also was a little bit let down by the sort of darker tone of it. I felt like Scully and Mulder seemed quite sad. There was less jokes. I think personally, I didn't enjoy it as much at that stage of my life. I was young though. I mean, 2008, God, I can't remember how young I was. I was in my early 20s. So, and I was a big shipper. I still am a big shipper, but some of the shipping has given way to maybe me being more interested in other areas of the X-Files. So now I see the film quite differently. And I think I was a big shipper at the time, so I was quite excited that Mulder and Scully had a kiss, and everything. But now I watch the film for different reasons. So, I mean, revisiting it, it's been years since I watched it, so revisiting it for this podcast was an interesting experience. There's quite a bit of it that I'd forgotten. And I didn't recognise other actors in the film the first time I watched it, and this time watching it, I'm like, oh, I remember him, or I recognise her. Some of the actors were very recognisable to me as well. Yeah.
I was speaking on the previous episode about how I wasn't a big fan of this film in 2008, and I was watching it again today, and I imagine back in 2008 I would have been sat there with massive popcorn or whatever, and the stuff about Scully's patient, the young boy, at the time I imagine I probably would have found that very dull, and now I find all that side of it quite intriguing, actually. So it's definitely a film I've grown to like a lot more. So what would you rate it out of 10, and, how do you see it on your most recent sort of rewatch, this film?
So I actually would rate it much higher this time round. I think partly because I appreciate the way it's filmed. I appreciate the locations, the atmosphere. I appreciate both Gillian Anderson and David Duchovny's acting a lot more. And I think I understood more of the story at this stage in my life than I did when I first watched it. So I think I would probably give it an 8 out of 10 now, which is really quite high. I am quite critical of films, so just because it's an 8 out of 10 doesn't mean I didn't like it. It would probably take quite a bit for me to give a film a 10 out of 10. So
I think that's pretty fair. I mean, I can't quite remember. I think I was a 7 or a 7.5 on the opening episodes. Earlier in I Want to Believe minute. So I think that's a perfectly valid score, Clara. And anyway, what about this particular minute? So I suppose that's the thing with these minute podcasts. Occasionally you get a minute where, on the face of it at least, not that much is happening. So primarily this one involves Mulder and Scully getting onto a helicopter. It involves the helicopter in transit, and the helicopter is touching down as the minute comes to an end. I suppose you could argue that it's more important than that, though, because at the end of the previous minute, Mulder has said that he'll go back and see what the FBI wants of him under one condition. And now it becomes apparent in this minute, doesn't it, that Scully coming with him is that one condition. So it's actually quite a big theme in the movie, isn't it? The extent to which Mulder and Scully can investigate things together anymore, whether this is their life anymore, whether Scully wants to do this. So you could argue that actually this is setting up something that's fairly pivotal later on. Do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that, it's noticeable that when they get into the helicopter, he opens the door for her and makes sure she gets in.
And she sits up front, doesn't she?
Up front, yeah. It's actually interesting that the helicopter was sent for them. Yeah. Because I completely forgot that from the first time I watched it. I seem to remember them driving around like in West Virginia in the snow a lot. I don't remember them taking this quite dramatic helicopter ride over the landscape of Washington, D.C. And so I was like, oh, wow, I forgot they took a helicopter. And that shows that the FBI doesn't just want him to come back and consult, which is quite a big deal for him, having the way he left the FBI, but also that they're willing to pay for a helicopter, which is a pretty big deal, I mean. But yeah, I think you're right. The theme, which is, here in this 1 minute, of Mulder wanting Scully to come with him, and the fact that he needs her in order to investigate, whether he needs her expertise, which I think he does at times, or whether he actually just needs her there for like emotional and mental security is probably a mix of both, to be honest. And I can see why she might not necessarily want to go down that road again. But I think it's been like that throughout the whole franchise, isn't it? It's like, as soon as he learns something, he has to tell Scully. Scully is like, he needs her there to help him to actually operate. Like he goes off on his own. He does his own exciting investigations on his own when he probably shouldn't sometimes. But he's always got to come back and report it to Scully. He needs her as a sounding board, I think.
Yeah, I think the two of them need to... It isn't just Mulder's breakthroughs, is it? It's that she adds something as well, and they work in harmony very well. Is this all just a bit rushed in a way? Because I was looking at this and I was thinking, well, we're actually only 10 minutes into the film here, and we've already seen, we've seen the woman get attacked at the start of the film. We've seen a bit of the stuff with Billy Connolly. We've seen that Scully's working in the hospital. We've learned a little bit about that boy. We've seen that Scully then goes to see Mulder. And so within 10 minutes, they're on their way back to Washington, back to see the FBI. And I don't know how I feel about this aspect of the film sometimes, because of the way the truth finished, in a way, where it seemed like they were really on the outs, and that, any future... I always imagined them on the run in a future second film. Before the film had been made, I thought, we'll back up with Mulder and Scully, and they'll be, they're being chased by the FBI, and they'll stumble onto some small town and get into an adventure there. But do you think it, is it a nicely, like, an economical piece of storytelling that they can come back quite quickly and then we get on with the investigation, or does it seem a bit rushed? Or I don't know. Do you have any feelings about that?
I think it is bewildering. I think that's one of the reasons why I struggled with it when I first watched it. And similarly, why I struggled with some of the new seasons of The X-Files, which is like, why would the FBI really want these people back? And how is it that they have ended up in such prominent positions again in investigations? It is stretching it, the storyline a bit. In a similar way that later on, I'm sure you'll talk about this with somebody else in another minute, Scully Google's stem cell research and somehow manages to do brain surgery off a Google search. But it stretches the story. I mean, this is the case with lots of films and television. Sometimes they just have to speed the story quicker, so forward.
Yeah.
So they kind of are like a little bit fantastical with the storytelling sometimes.
And also, I suppose they've got to serve different audiences here. People who watched every episode and are very familiar with everything that happened up to the end of season 9, people who are casual and haven't watched the X-Files for a few years, people who, maybe have stumbled into the cinema to watch I Want to Believe without much knowledge of the X-Files at all. So I can understand maybe why they would go down this road.
I think there is a question throughout the entire franchise, which is, if Mulder is such a threat, why don't they just kill him? And I know there's lots of periods where he's almost killed and everything, but no one really ever tries to seriously assassinate Mulder. And if he was such a problem, do you know what I mean? They would just kill him. Like, why wouldn't they just kill him? They go through all, like the government, the conspiracy, everything they go through all these lengths in order to prevent Mulder doing this, to hide this from Mulder, whatever. And so I guess in this film a little bit, it's like, would the FBI want him back? They probably wouldn't. But, he's our hero. We have to see him on the screen. Well, we want to see him on the screen. And it wouldn't make a very good, interesting franchise if they killed the hero off, like, very early on. Do you know what I mean? So I think you have to suspend your disbelief. But I think with lots of the X-Files, at times, you have to suspend your disbelief. And that's part of the fantasy of it, I suppose, when you're watching it. Just
on the technical side of things, this scene of them getting into the helicopter was shot as daylight was fading. And Chris Carter said that it was a funny one because no one was actually directing this in any real sense, because Chris Carter was at a distance and was kind of remotely telling the cameraman what to do. He does remark on how it's a fairly important scene because you need to get across the idea that Scully is along for the ride, so you need to show her entering a helicopter. Then the shot of Washington is a stock shot. It's stock footage of the helicopter flying into Washington, D.C. We can probably talk about Exhibit's character a little bit more in a future minute. I mean, we see him here, don't we, from behind, watching the chopper as it's coming down to land. But yeah, I think we'll get more into him at a future time because he speaks, I think, in the next minute. Just before we go, on Fight the Future Minute, I did some little bits of trivia, Clara. So, seeing as they're flying to Washington, D.C., I've looked at some fun facts about Washington, D.C., and I thought I would see what you made of these before we go. All right, so one is that 2 American presidents kept alligators at the White House. Now, I would love to say there's a prize if you can name the 2 presidents. There isn't, but I'd just be very impressed. Which American presidents do you think kept alligators at the White House?
Wow. Yeah, that's tough.
Which era are you thinking, firstly? Like, I suppose you got to think about those older guys where, or do you think more recent? You think Trump or somebody had alligators?
Oh, no, no. I think there's probably laws about having exotic pets in the US now. Well, there should be, but I mean, I would say probably, I want to say Roosevelt. Would Roosevelt have one? No.
No. The names I've got here, I'm looking at.
It's got to be a, what's it called? Republican president.
Well,
who knows? You never know.
Let's find out. So Herbert Hoover and John Quincy Adams had pet alligators in the White House.
Never would have said John Quincy Adams. Never. I could see Herbert Hoover. There we get though.
The second fact I wanted to give you is that President Jimmy Carter loved to watch movies in the White House, and nobody apparently has beaten his record of watching movies in the White House cinema. How many movies do you think he watched in his presidency? And bearing in mind, of course, he was a one-term president, wasn't he?
So he's president for 4 years, right? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to say 2000.
Now, we had to leave some time for like running the country.
Okay.
So,
wait, no, let me start again. 600 movies.
That's a bit closer. 480 is the answer.
480. I guess, I mean, how long would it take you to watch 2000 films? I'm overestimating how much time there is in a day, aren't I? So 400, no, you said 480.
480.
Wow.
I don't know if this is true, but I seem to remember hearing at one point that the most, popularly screened film at the White House is High Noon, because I think the idea of the lone man standing up to these maligned forces and, being quite steadfast probably appeals to American presidents, do you think?
Yeah, and sort of standing alone against adversity, and it's very what would be the word, like individualistic film. It's not a film that it's I would say small government film. It's not a big government film, is it? It's not a film that would appeal to socialists. Because it isn't about the town isn't about the town coming together to stand against somebody, is it? It's about one man going out on his own and individual strength.
There are different political readings of High Noon, I think, because John Wayne famously said he thought it was the most un-American film he'd ever seen. Famously, so, and he very much wasn't a socialist.
Yeah, that's true.
Fair to say.
Yeah,
so.
He really wasn't.
I'll just give you one quick fact, which I heard this the other day and it absolutely blew my mind, which is that the 10th president of the United States, right, he was a man called John Tyler. He was president of the US from 1841 to 1845, okay. The 10th president. And as far as I know, at the time of recording, President John Tyler has a living grandson. Isn't that just remarkable? You can't compute.
Wow, a living grandson.
I believe so, because
did they have children really late in life?
Well, I think they must have, yeah, because I think the grandson is kind of getting on these days in his 90s or something. But
so the son must have had the grandson.
So the president must have had a son at a fairly advanced age, and then his son must have had children fairly late too. Crazy. You would think, and
that is like an X-File. Or they've got some sort of long life access to like the Fountain of Youth or something. I actually have a ceramic plate with all the presidents up till Clinton on them that my mother got from a car boot sale in South London. So I should go
nice.
Get that plate. It was actually weirdly made in Japan, but it's got all the presidents. It's got little portraits of all the presidents on it, and then Bill Clinton in the middle. I think it was like a Clinton commemorative plate.
Did it have President William Henry Harrison on it? Because he was the president before John Tyler. He was the 9th president, and famously, he died in office 31 days after being inaugurated as president. So he was kind of like the Liz Truss of his era.
It's not really his fault, though, right?
He had the excuse of being dead.
How did he die?
Really
was it through nefarious means, or was it through natural?
It was illness, I believe.
Poor guy. He made it to the top, but didn't last there long.
Yeah, he became ill with cold-like symptoms, sent for his doctor, and things deteriorated from there. So, very sad. Anyway, we've strayed fairly far from the X-Files, I want to believe, but we'll get back on track in the next minute, Clara. So I look forward to speaking to you then, and we'll be back to cover minute 12 very soon. But until then, always remember, trust no one.